Hello, everyone. Welcome to your Alex J. Brady Patreon download for September. Thank you so much for tuning in, and of course for your support. I don't want to overstate this, but basically, you guys are keeping a roof over me and my other half's head at the moment, so it really does mean a huge amount to me. Thank you. I want you guys to sit back and just enjoy seeing how the work that you made possible came together, and hopefully, take away some, some techniques that you can use yourself. I'll try and keep all my methods really simple because I'm a pretty simple person. So yeah, I try and cut a lot of corners and without doing anything too complicated, get my work looking the way it does. So hopefully, seeing how it comes together, you can get a sense of maybe you could use some of these techniques in your own stuff. Um, all right. So this is the image I wanted to work from. I'd done this a while ago. I already had a few attempts at doing a sandworm of June before, but this was the one that I felt kind of went the best. I liked the sense of the texture of its surface. This kind of bluish purple felt interesting. I hadn't seen a worm like this, but it felt kind of right. Just instinctively, I don't know why, just kind of cool. I like the feeling that it's heavy and weighty. I looked at whale corpses that washed up on the beach and things like big snakes, pythons, and anacondas and things, and their bodies tend to sag under their own weight. So they're just these huge rippling muscles, but they look like they have weight in a way that I felt a lot of the sandworms I'd seen so far didn't really deform in that way. They just have a circular cross section. So I wanted to preserve that. I quite like the beak. I think it's kind of interesting, like it's a big, almost like shellfish. I know in the book the worms are described as looking a bit like shipworms, so that kind of inspired me a bit. Made it a three-way jaw, like in the amazing John Shona illustrations that they obviously used to base all the book covers and the designs for the film from. But yeah, just to give it a more of a kind of chitinous front end seemed an interesting, different way of doing things. I mean, all of this work will be in the shadow of Shona's stuff. His is the definitive June illustration in my book, so and Frank Herbert's book, literally. So yeah, I wanted to sort of sidestep that a bit, whilst paying tribute to it. Um, the figure, in fact, is meant to be inspired by Shiana in Heretics of June. This is a sequel to June, set, spoiler warning, set thousands of years after the original. A long story has taken place between the original book and what's happening in this image, but essentially, long story short, the worms now contain a fragment of the awareness of Paul's son, Leto. And so this girl is born who is found to have some kind of ability to communicate in some sense with the worms. The book doesn't describe whether she was dressed like someone out of the Strokes, but creative license. Someone pointed out that she would die without her gloves on, and that's a perfectly good point, and her hood as well. There'd be no reason for a Fremen to do this, but for the sake of the image, kind of made a bit of artistic license. Anyway, so I went back into the original model, 3D model, and grabbed it. So I took all the texture information with it and so on. And I wanted to create some new work. So let's have a look. So this was the first piece. I basically had no ideas of what I wanted to do. I just took some photographs. That tends to be my first approach. I'll design and build something slowly in a kind of repeating cycle of more and more complex models. So sketches, then simple models, then more detailed models, and just looking at it, making changes. Imagine how you would start with a lump of clay that's just a blob, and you would over time nudge it towards something that looks like a realistic sculpture, a carving of a face or whatever. That's exactly how I work in 3D, more or less. So anyway, I took a bunch of photographs of this monstrosity from different angles and then dropped them into Photoshop. And I thought it would be kind of nice in the lower half of the image to have something to give a sense of scale to the worm, and what better than have some Fremen there, because we don't see them much in the book or the movie really, apart from in Paul's point of view. So I like the feeling of just kind of hanging out with the Fremen. Maybe this is a crew of Fremen who are so hardcore that they don't even bother with thumpers. They just stand there clapping and stomping in a way that is attracts the worm but doesn't get them all killed. Maybe they have some strategy to do that. So that's what I thought would be a fun thing to have in the lower part of the image. And I'll show you how I made all of that stuff in a sec. So this is the second picture. So the first one, I thought, playing around with the fact that these Fremen think of this worm as God. The first frame might have been waiting for God. It's kind of a play on that, the play Waiting for Godot. That's the kind of thing that I find, like, am I going to say funny? No. Amusing to me, I guess. But anyway, yeah, so this is the day of rest. I thought maybe the rendering of the worm, it was half submerged in the sand. What's it doing? Why is it here? Maybe it's hanging out in this hot gunge, having a little spa. Who knows? Kind of tickled me that maybe the worm has this kind of private life like this. They're never really described much in the books, which I think is fine. They're almost like, a force of nature, like kind of like the Joker in Batman. They're not really people or animals. They're just a kind of force, an elemental force. But maybe it's kind of fun imagining what an elemental force does on its Sunday. So maybe it's sitting in this kind of mud and just enjoying itself. The orange stuff might be spice or something else. I have no idea. It kind of reminds me of that from in South Park, when Randy Marsh is sitting at his computer just covered in mess because he's had such a great time on the computer. It kind of reminds me of that. Dropped in a scale guide Thopter at the front and some perplexed looking people, and so that was quite a fun one. And then I thought, if Sunday is the day of rest, then as far as I'm concerned, Monday morning is definitely the day of wrath. My commute on a Monday morning is something I don't miss from a day job. I used to live up the motorway from where I live now, and absolutely thrashing my car up country roads or the motorway in the rush hour in the rain because I'm always late. It's not something I miss, and I think Shai-Hulud feels the same. So this is the kind of worm on the rampage. If the previous image was kind of chilling at a 2 out of 10, and the one where they're waiting is kind of a 6 out of 10 in terms of how kind of aware of kind of how angry the worm is, basically, then this is like up there at a 7 or an 8. It's getting really cross now. So I wanted to hint that maybe it's come to the crashed Thopter of June and Jessica in the book. If you remember, they were put on a Thopter to be taken out to the desert to be executed. They managed to escape and kill the guards, but then the Thopter is damaged and it crashes. So I thought that would be a good scale guide to the front the forehand of the image, foreground of the image. Sorry, that's generally how I often think about an image. What can I have to put certain things in certain places to make the image read. What can I do in terms of narrative? So I could have just put a rock there or something, but I thought maybe you could have a piece of the wreckage of the Thopter that snapped off before the crash, and then have Paul and Jessica hiding behind it. That's not something that ever happened in the book, but I just want to have a way of putting some tiny people looking very insignificant and terrified, to show how enormous and terrifying this monster in the background really is. So it's all kind of, it's driven by technical reasons, but then you can kind of pin narrative on the top of that a lot of times when I work. So anyway, I quite like the idea that the worm gets hotter the more angry it becomes. This isn't an organism that's based on water like we are. It's some kind of alien chemistry, and inside it is just an inferno. So as it gets angrier, it gets hotter and hotter, and it's just giving off these great big gouts of high pressure vapor of some kind, and smoke, and it's also raising a huge trail of dust behind it, almost like it's bringing the sandstorm with it. Do you remember the movie The Mummy with the sandstorm that had the big face in it? I always thought that was a kind of it was copied loads, but I always thought it was kind of cool. So it kind of has that feel to it, this elemental force. The plume of smoke and stuff behind it is kicking up giant static charges, which are discharging in these giant arcs. The sun is just poking through dimly through all of this airborne dust and sand, and it's throwing itself towards the Thopter to crush whatever it is. It's just about to roll over the Thopter like a tsunami, and the people in the foreground are just desperately trying to control their breathing and stay quiet and not attract it, and hopefully it'll pass them by. All right, so let's see how this came together. So I really wanted to show how this worm is just vast behind it, but you can use a lot of movie magic to get that effect. So I used force perspective. What I did is put the people I'll show you how I made them in a sec, but I put the people in front of this very simple model. It's only made of 2 or 3 parts, this whole image. The model of the worm and its beak, the people and the sand. But you can see that the worm, although larger than them, is through force perspective made to look much larger than them. If you can render those out on different layers, you can basically play with the different components of the image when you comp it. So yeah, you don't have to literally have it as large. That would basically help with things like, you know, just keeping the model scene light and keeping everything near the origin and stuff. My computer is so basic that you have to kind of conserve memory all the time. Oh, let me pause it for a sec. So this is how I created the body of the worm along this kind of coiled shape. What you do is you use a path deform modifier. And I imagine there's similar things in other 3D programs. What it basically does is takes your object and tries to stretch it along a spline, a line. So as you see, if I change the values of the path deform, it moves up and down the line, and it can be compressed in different dimensions. You have to fiddle around with these settings to make it work, basically. You know, change the dimension, the axes that it's in, because sometimes it'll be defaulting to the wrong one, and then move these numbers up and down until it's doing what you want. But you can see how you can take a simple object and conform it to this spline. The spline can be animated, and also so can the numbers in the actual modifier. So you can animate this thing slithering. It's great if you want to have like water droplets slithering around, slime, worms, all of that kind of stuff, all that kind of good stuff. It's really handy for that. So that's how I built it. The actual body of the worm is super simple. It's just a cylinder that I've mesh smoothed a bit. I'll show you in a sec. Oh yeah, so you can change the settings to make it shorter and longer and stuff. It's really fun to be able to build something and then just nudge it in different directions to see if it would look better, you know, shorter or thicker or any of this other. Twist it, you know. It's so difficult to talk about the worms and not just be constantly cracking myself up. Just try and be a grown-up about this, and we'll all get through it together. So there's the body of the worm without the path deform applied, and you can see that it's just a simple object, like literally a cylinder with the end cut off, tapered a bit to taste, and then I've put this very simple texture onto it, which I drew in Photoshop. Just some lines, just to imply the ring segments of the worm. I don't think that's actually in the diffuse channel, i.e. the color. It's actually in the roughness channel. So the dark parts will be rougher and the light parts smoother or whatever. That kind of gives it the surface this feel of like the rings being there, but without it being in actual color information. It's just the kind of glossiness of the surface, as if some parts are protected from wear more than others. You know, it's something like that. There's some kind of process going on for that to be the case. So yeah, you can see that the humans sit in the foreground, the worm in the background. The beak is super simple. I think I bought that asset. Just pause it. I think I bought that asset as like a shellfish, like a mussel or something, and then just painted the teeth around the insides. So this image isn't, as I say, specifically described in the book, but yeah, that's definitely my thinking when I was kind of creating these characters. I want to show, you know, a Jessica who's in shock. Her husband has just been murdered. Her family and home has been destroyed in a violent coup. She's narrowly escaped murder by the guards, and then she's narrowly escaped a plane crash in which she's been injured. And then, just to top off the best day ever, this angry god is on the rampage trying to find her and kill her. So, yeah, even her Bene Gesserit training is starting to buckle under the combined stress of all of this, and she's going into shock basically. Paul, on the other hand, is away with the fairies, not being a massive amount of emotional support. He's kind of lost in a mystical trance almost. He's still thinking and acting tactically, but is less afraid at the moment. His feelings are kind of compressed, and yeah, he's being of limited support to Jessica, but really he's kind of just almost in a more philosophical mood. I mean, the real reason, as I say, is that they're just to be a foreground to compare to this giant monster behind them, but it's always so much fun just to tack that narrative onto the kind of practical concerns of the image. All right. So let's have a look at how all this came together. Basically, I use a program called DAZ 3D, and it's a free software. It's like free to play basically. You have to buy the assets that you want to use after the initial free stuff, but yeah, it's pretty useful. I find it absolutely indispensable. It's very clunky and janky. The interface is confusing, but I find it absolutely essential. Unfortunately, the boobs and buttocks tend to poke through the cloth before it simulates each time, so apologies for that. Um, but yeah, you can see that it's absolutely, you know, incredibly useful when you want to pose people for your scenes. You can manipulate every muscle and every gesture is every facial expression can be manipulated. You can cause the mouth to make phonemes. It's really amazing what it can do. Sorry, phonemes. Yeah, this is the spacesuit asset that I bought. I think it cost a couple of bucks. I do this quite often, just buy cheap assets with a license, and then you can use them for whatever you want. It's also where I got the hood of the still suit from, but it's the main thing I used for this scene is the Omega hooks. Same for Paul. This is just the same asset I used for Leto in the Laser Tigers image, because I want them to be detailed enough that you can understand what they're feeling and who they are roughly, but I don't want them to be the main kind of focus of the image. And again, because for some reason the skeleton of that one, when you do one of the predefined poses, which are very good, but sometimes I guess the pose numbers don't quite line up with the skeleton of the model you're trying to use, so you get these weird bugs where the arm fouls through the body and stuff. You have to move it manually back to something that looks good. These are all problems that probably have solutions. I just haven't figured them out, and I just don't have time, so I just kind of get muddle through as best I can. Again, I say it's very janky, the interface, but it is just so handy, that program, that I couldn't be without it now. I love it. So you can see how they all fit into the image. So let's rip the PSD down from final version to the basics, and you can see how the image came together based on the renders of the assets that I just built. So it's not a perfect chronological record, as I put some layers behind others after the fact, kind of like how in an archaeological dig you might find a modern subway tunnel down somewhere in the archaeological strata just because it's been put there after the fact. But generally, it's a decent record of the chronological history of the image. I tried to record the production of the image in Photoshop, but it creates such a lag on my cursor that I couldn't actually do it, unfortunately. Again, computer issues. Hopefully, as time goes by, I can buy a better computer. But when things improve, that's definitely on the top of the list. So yeah, hopefully I'll be able to do kind of breakdowns of the images in real time. But for now, I'll break down this one in the layers, and you can see how it came together. You can see at this start and quite a long way through, I actually intended to have a big static arc coming off the front of the worm onto the wreckage of the Thopter. And that's an idea I like. This kind of almost like a Tesla coil in front of the worm that's just striking the sand in front of it with lightning strikes. But I felt that it kind of confused the image a bit, having one in the back and one in the front. So I removed it. But yeah, that idea will probably come back. So let's go down the stack. So I keep it all on different layers, so I can adjust each thing individually until the very end. I'll keep layer discipline quite tight until the very end, so I'll try and always, keep things behind other things when I want them to be, until the very end when it's just down to kind of one pixel brush, just painting on the top of everything. But yeah, for most of the way through the image, when I'm still unsure of the composition, I want to just keep things tight and disciplined. You can see I've been using reference for the dust cloud from a pyroclastic flow. I really enjoy painting the high pressure vapor venting from the sides of the angry worm. Like its internal fire gets hotter and hotter the more cross it becomes. The lightning and clouds are referenced from volcanic lightning, where huge static charges build up in the plumes of the ash above volcanoes, which I think looks truly godlike. I mean, you can see where the legend of Thor came from. there's that lightning arc I was talking about. I may do a version of the image with that on there because I think it's a kind of fun idea, but it's always good to keep stuff like that in the back pocket. If you have an idea that works really well but is kind of arguing with the rest of the image, just keep it for another version. Just do as many as you like. Now we're stripping away the kind of surface layers of stuff that I've done by hand, giving the image some life, and we're moving back to just the models. You see how that I had an idea for maybe having a second sandworm in the image, but I just didn't like the way it looked. I know it sounds silly to say, but it looked too phallic. There's a limit to how phallic I'm willing to make my images look. It's that, basically, what you see now. I opened the jaw a bit from the original. I wanted to show that its mood was more willful today. And then you can see the sky. The sky is actually where it all started. I found that image based off something I sort of saw in my mind of, like, I wanted to see the sun peeking through this dust cloud, and that was the best image I could find for it, the best plate. And that's set the tone for the rest of the image. Someone asked me about the teeth of the worm. Why are they these spiky teeth? Personally, I can't imagine them chewing anything with these. I imagine that they swallow whatever it is, a bit like a dinosaur or a bird, and then grind it up in their stomach. Maybe they eat the boulders or something. So the teeth are really just to help stuff go down, like on a goose or one of those snapping turtles or something. I read that in coal-fired power plants, they don't just feed lumps of coal into the fire like in Back to the Future 3 or something. They grind it up with big ball bearings and then until it's a fine powder, and then inject it almost like a liquid into the furnace. And because it's a powder, its huge surface area means that it burns really hot. So that kind of influenced me here. This kind of fire and smoke. I actually grew up near Ironbridge, where they invented industry, basically, at the start of the Industrial Revolution. And there's a lot of this kind of pictures of Ironbridge in its heyday, like this huge gouts of steam and dark satanic mills, the whole thing. It's where Mordor was inspired by. So yeah, it's always been on my mind since I was a kid. And there actually has been, until quite recently, a coal-fired power station there, which we looked around, and that's where I learned about the ball bearings. So you get secret behind-the-scenes info now. This is a zoom in of Paul and Jessica, or whoever they are. I would suggest that they're Paul and Jessica, but they don't have to be. But anyway, yeah, hiding behind some piece of wreckage. As you can see, it's very rough. I might kind of zoom in and paint this up a bit as a proper painting at some point. But for now, it's super rough because it just appears so small on the screen. All right, let's have a look at the next one. So this is actually the first one I made, but I thought the Wrath of God was a more impactful one to start with. But let's go to this one. So you can see that I took a render of it from a long shot lens. At this point, I didn't really have any idea what I wanted to do, but I thought it's kind of a cool image. This is what happens if you make the lens have more perspective. You just see the front of the worm, and the rest just goes away into the distance. It's actually longer than I would like it to be, but because you use the perspective-free lens, it doesn't matter. It crushes everything in the view that I used. Again, I used the path deform, so just drew a line with some squiggles in it to give you a sense that this thing's slithering along. Very, very simple. The body is the same as we've seen before. It's just this cylinder tapered at one end with a very simple texture applied to the glossiness channel. And again, the mouth. It's, as I say, bought as a, I think I just typed in like 3D model mussel, shellfish, something like that. And then I drew those little teeth. They're actually just a cylinder that's bent over with its end tapered into a cone, and then just copied and pasted a bunch of times and put in place. You can sort of paint things onto the existing geometry. Oops. Put that back. Yeah, so you can see it's just a bent, tapered over cylinder. Super simple. Sand, I think I downloaded again, free 3D model sand dunes or something, and this is one that came up. It's a very heavy model, actually. I tend to get rid of it when I'm not using it. That's what happens when you turn the path to form on from the front. You can see that the body conforms to the shape. Gives you this cool kind of powerful yet not too big on the image. It's just a good effect that I like to use. I wanted to put the Fremen in the foreground, so I just built them in DAZ. Again, very simple models. I think there's like 2 or 3 different models with some random crap stuck to them, all painted black. Again, I didn't want them to be the focus of the image, just context, so they're not detailed at all. Just enough to tell a story of like people waiting, clapping, holding maker hooks. That's sufficient. So let's break down the PSD, go down the layers. I was experimenting with different levels of distance bluing, like dust in the air and so on. I wanted to set the worm back a bit in the image by just lightening it somewhat, but not so much that it becomes the background. I want it to be definitely still the focus of the image. That's what came out of the renderer that I built upon, and then just comped it into a background plate and then started painting on that. That's standard procedure, really. And then, as I say, the narrative elements kind of get tacked on. So I need something in the foreground. What would be nice? I know some people. What can they be doing? They could be maybe clapping to bring the worm. Maybe the worm's got some steam and crap venting out of it, so it's like moderately irritated. And let's do the same process with the final image, Day of Rest. So again, this is what came out of the renderer rather. Same as before, pass deform. Yada, yada, yada. But I submerged it in the sand a bit, because all my worms so far have been on top of the sand, and someone was like, don't they swim in the sand? I was like, okay, let's do that. There's the people. There's the Thopter. I actually drew that based on some piles of stones, which I thought would be a nice foreground element. I kind of downplayed them a bit because it looked a bit like bird poo, but yeah, I think piles of stones is kind of eternal, timeless kind of desert ornamentation. Yeah, you can see that I drew the Thopter there and then just shaded it in very basically, and then you can see the background plate. So I really just slapped the rendering like that onto the plate and thought, what can this thing be doing? Maybe it's submerged in some kind of hot, poisonous mud. That would be cool. And then just went with that. This is my favourite part, when you're at the top of the image and you're just painting in detail and stuff. It's so fun. It's not a Ukrainian flag, by the way. Someone pointed that out. It's just blue and yellow. It's a coincidence. So this is your images for this month. Thank you so much for making all this work possible. I really, I literally couldn't do it without you. Stick around. I'm going to do some videos for voiceover for last month's Gedi Prime, so the land of the Harkonnens, and I also did a couple of other projects this month, which I will do voiceovers for, like the Batmobile. But again, just want to emphasize, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy the download. If you have any questions, let me know. If you have any ideas, if you want to use any of the assets for your own projects, go for it. I would love to see. Let me just give you a big shout out to Carcoon, who did an amazing animation of the guild navigators moving their ship a couple of weeks ago. I'll add that as well, and I hope you have a look because it's freaking amazing. I was blown away. Thanks very much, guys. See ya. So I was going to put the credits up and let some music play, but I think to show my respect and thanks for making this work possible, I really ought to read your guys' names out. So thank you so much to Adam Chess, Adam Ingle, Adam Muto, Alistair Collins. Thank you, Aaron Paulson, Alec Whitmore, Alex Rice, Alex Tenorio, Alan Martin, Andrew Briggs, Andrew Jones, Anime Motorcycle Club, Ansem Zelonka, Anton, Arturo Gutierrez, Asu Rocks. Thank you so much to Banana, Barris Gassel, Ben Thomas, Bin Lu, Blue Delicanti, Brett Kittle, Caleb Yarian, Carcoon, and again, big shout out to Carcoon for their amazing animation. Chase Stone, Chris Atkinson, thanks to Chris Clark, Chris McCluskey, Christian McRae, Christopher Imhoff, Clark, and Clinton Felker. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much to Cole Bairden, Comrade Spamuel, Cormac O'Brien, Craig Dallimore. Thanks, Cyrus Semanian, D. Thory, Daniel Christensen, Daniel Hawksworth. Thanks to Daniel Hirschberger and Dave Clayton. Thanks, Del Parrish and Drew. Thanks, Duncan Fisher, Dustin Barbie, Edward DeBrunner, MV Center, Espen Olsen Satovic. Thanks, Brav. FM Pone, Gavin Holscher, Gentle Reader, Giles Keating, Grumblegus, Gwenael Lecossoir. Correct me if I mangle any of your names, please, and I'll do my best to correct that next time. Hamish Freighter, thank you. Thanks to Happy Nigel, Hunter Alexander, Haley, Insum, JD Cohen, Jack Douglas, Jim Scott, Jasper. Thanks to JT Smolker, Jay Chevrier, Jeff Bergman, Jeff Segal. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks, Jeremy, Jisoo, Joe Euro, Joel Johnson, John, Josh Dryling, Josh McSavany. Thanks to Joshua Groban, Kai Stevens, Katie Westlake, Kazunori Makino, and Keith Dudley. And thanks to Chris Kamienki. Kamieniki. Chris, sorry if I've completely butchered your name there. I do apologize, but thank you very much. Thanks very much to Lauren Lee Oscar, Ling Lin Fan, Logan Dwight, Marieka Kirsten Duma, Mark Berry, Mark Berriton, Mark Drew. Thanks to Matt Hughes, Max Kalunga, Michael Karpinski, Michael Martin, Mike Falcon. Awesome names, guys. Mike Grushin, Minister of Doom, Mr. Quimper, Nate Emans, Nathan Strachan, Neil Steenson. And thanks, Neil, for your useful suggestions a few months ago for doing the new work. Thanks very much. Nick Punt, Oliver Queen, Parabellum, Passion Playing Cards, Patrick Brown, Paul Askett, Peepus Inc., Per Albacar, Phil Booth, and Poya Moyedi. Thanks very much to Raoul Allen, Rom, Ryan Springler, Sam Rowan, Sarah Horrocks, Simaj, Seth Rutledge, Seth Thomas, Sten Nordstrom, Stephen Quinn, Stevie Moore, and Taylor Moore. And thank you so much, Terence Jeffords. And finally, thank you, The Cheat, Thomas Denuville, Thomas Mahoney, Thomas Powers. Thanks, guys. Timur Kvazov, Titus Lunter, Tom Hutchins, Waleed Rostam, Will Menaker, and Just William at the end. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it so much. Keep your suggestions coming in for new stuff for me to do next month. I work for you now, so feel free to make the most of that. And thanks again, guys. Keep in touch. You know where I am. If you need to talk to me about anything, just let me know. And until next month, see ya.